everyone. Welcome back to The Prompt. On today's episode, we will be discussing something totally not controversial and that doesn't require a lot of conversation, which is security. And I was kidding about everything I just said.
Super chill topic.
I think that as marketers, I don't know about all of you, but I get spooked when I hear data privacy, when I hear GDPR, when I hear things like how are we dealing with security when reaching for these new tools. And so, Alton, I was stoked to see that you published a blog post with our head of security, John. And I love a TLDR on how your conversation went with him. And what you can expect from this episode is hearing the three of us sort of just talk through that and what marketers should be looking out for and how we should be speaking internally about security as we sort of start championing these AI tools internally.
Yeah, totally. It's a conversation I was excited to have because I have some heavy opinions on data security overall, but I also don't know anything about data encryption and the technical nuts and bolts of how data protections work and stuff. So being able to talk to him shed a lot of light on some things that users and businesses can think about when they're using these AI tools. And I don't know, it just gave me some food for thought on data privacy overall. So some of the biggest takeaways were him offering some insights on from the business side, people being more aware of the specific tools that they're using and whether or not they can get into an agreement with these providers on if the providers are going to use their data, use user data in any way. So are the inputs that I type into this particular AI tool going to be used to retrain the tool? Are they going to be kept on a server somewhere and used for another reason that I may not know about? Or is there an agreement in place that says it's not going to be used at all? It'll be held on our server for 30 days, for instance, and then deleted, or it's not going to be used in any capacity. It just disappears the instant that you type something into it. So yeah, that was a recommendation for companies. On the user side, he recommended people not enter sensitive personal identification information like email addresses, phone numbers, home addresses, things like that. And a lot of common sense things when you kind of think about it to a certain degree. But yeah, in light of those two pretty major insights, I wanted to ask both of you all as marketers and people who build campaigns for things and build a lot of content that sometimes might have some sensitive proprietary information in it. So let's say hypothetically you don't work at an AI company, but you have a major product launch coming up. You want to use AI to help get some content out the door a little bit faster, a little bit easier, just streamline things a little bit more, but you're interested in protecting that proprietary data. What are some of the steps that you would take to make sure that data is protected? Do you do some shopping around to see which tool has the best agreements? Do you adjust the data that you put in and be kind of careful about talking about these things versus these things? What are your strategies in there?
Oh man, my toxic trait's going to come out immediately where I'm like, shouldn't my organization have done that for me? Like I'm a marketer, not a security, you know what I mean, procurement person. Like I feel like I would love to go into that being like, hey, I want an AI tool for my org. Here are 3 that I think are great for businesses. Okay, security procurement people, like pick the best one for me and let me get it implemented. Alton, I think you make a great point on like AI has been winning right now in the media, in our hearts, in our laptops, like everywhere. Everyone's using AI because of the productivity gains it gives us immediately. And so if I now have to stop and wait for that and have to start like thinking about what can I put in, what shouldn't I put in, like, I don't know, it kind of bites into those productivity gains for me. So that's what's coming to mind immediately.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely with you on like, please, someone higher than me, help me figure this out. And not only like which tool to use, but also like what can and can't I say? Like what is considered proprietary company information that I shouldn't using that tool? I think that would be my biggest question as like a content person. Like, what am I allowed to write about? What am I allowed to tell my agencies and freelancers to write about? I think the other big thing is like, this to me is like the next thing that companies are going to have to figure out, because right now everybody's so interested in AI and they're like, everybody's so curious about it. So I feel like the content team is using Jasper, the sales team might be using ChatGPT, another team might be using something else. Your freelancers are using whatever free tool they can get their hands on. And so I think also it would be important for me to understand what tool we're using, and then figure out what's the right way to like thread that through the entire company and communicate that to any outside, agencies, consultants, freelancers that we're using, so that our data does stay safe, because it's not just you, it's across your whole company. It's the people that you're, the outside resources that you're using. So yeah, I think that would be my biggest thing, is like, what tool is safe? What can and can't I say to it? And then also like, how do I make sure that all of our resources are using the same thing so that the data is actually safe? Because I think not only are we in a situation now still where people are just kind of using whatever and not telling their company, but even you have freelancers and agencies who are like still not comfortable admitting that they even use these tools, which is very problematic when you're trying to preserve your data. So yeah, I think just that's like the biggest thing that would be on my mind if I'm trying to implement this as not an AI company.
Totally. I think those are all like really great insights. And it reminds me of the story I was just reading about Walmart. In February, Walmart issued a memo to its employees saying, be careful what you put into ChatGPT specifically. And then shortly after that, they released a set of guidelines around like, okay, if you want to use this tool, this is how you're supposed to use it. This is what you like should and should not be putting into it. Things like that. And I think those guidelines are super important. Because we have guidelines like that when it comes to watching out for phishing scams and just general protections across the board for like just the data and things like that on our computers and in our emails. Like, why it would make perfect sense to have guidelines like that at companies on how to use AI, on what tools would make the most sense for like this, for our particular business based on the data protection services that they may or may not use and stuff like that. So yeah, it's about, I think, trusting that your organization is building the guidelines necessary to keep the data safe, to make sure that that the AI tools are being used in the right way, where you're not going to run into any issues down the line of like data leaking out or, things not being used in the way that they should be.
Yeah. And I think that's something that kind of like keeps me up at night as a content marketer, is I think for those leaders to create guidelines and teams to create guidelines, it's kind of on companies like us to first educate them on how to do that. What do those guidelines need to incorporate? Like, what does that even need to look like? So yeah, I think that's something that I also think about a lot, is like, oh, it's actually on us to like get this ball rolling a little bit and help these people out. I don't know, just that's constantly on my mind these days. Yeah.
I feel like add that to the list of things that keeps me up at night. But I have a question for the two of you, and it's sort of based on a real world example that I'll keep anonymous. But say you're working with a content agency. They write your SEO stuff. They do some of the editorial work for you, and you're about to renew your contract with them. And this is like current day and age, right? Like while like the AI discourse is happening, and they don't mention anything to you about AI. Like they haven't discussed it during any of their pitch meetings, any of their renewal meetings. They also haven't said they don't use it. They haven't said they do use it. It's just never come up. And the renewal's on your desk. Are you signing? Are you saying, wait, we haven't had a conversation about AI? Or are you saying, hey, I feel a type of way that you haven't even brought up AI yet? Like, what's your take on it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think for me, I'm definitely bringing it up because, like, there's no way you can move forward at this point, I think, without at least asking questions like, how are y'all using it for your other clients? What tools are you using? What are the pros and cons that you're seeing? I think I would probably initiate that conversation if they did not. But I definitely would a little bit. You're right. I would a little bit be like, why aren't we talking about this? Like, it's such a huge thing, and I know that you're using it or at least thinking about it. So yeah, it would be like kind of weird if they didn't bring it up first, but I would absolutely bring it up. There's no way I could move forward without it, I think.
Yeah, same. I would 100% have to ask, like, even if the renewal is right there on the table. I mean, I'm making a phone call and trying to get some insight as best as I can, because it is it's something that for the most part anyone in content right now, I would imagine, is like at least aware of its impact, aware of its capabilities and things like that. So yeah, I would love to get the perspective on their views toward it, how they use it, and even offer my guidelines on, like, this is how I would like to see it used. This is how I would not like to see it used in the content that you give me. Because I also feel
Yeah.
like as content professionals, it might be a little bit easier for us even to say, like, to see, okay, AI, there's a decent chance AI wrote this, because it's kind of like surface level, or like not as deep and nuanced as I would expect it to be. So it would be like imperative to a certain degree that we ask those questions.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
I
are you
agree.
asking them from a security perspective what tool they're using then? Because they do have like proprietary information about your company or a product that you maybe haven't announced yet or whatever. Like that's where it gets dicey. Like how deep
Yeah.
are we getting? How much transparency are we like demanding of
Yeah.
freelancers and agencies?
I think what's going to need to happen is it's just going to become baked into your brand guidelines, like kind of like Alton was saying, like as content professionals, it's kind of on us to set those guidelines too. And the hope would be that your marketing leadership and your team has decided on a tool that you trust and that feels safe to you, and then you can then go give any freelancers or agencies access to that tool, so that anything they create for you has to be run through that tool specifically. I don't know how you would monitor that or even like know if they use something else. I think that is where it would get tricky for me. Because yeah, it's like we can give them access to Jasper, but they could be using anything they want really without us knowing. So I think that's where it would get dicey. But I do think that like overall, it's just going to have to become part of your brand guidelines, and you just have to make sure that anybody you're working with outside of the company has access to the tool that you actually trust.
Yeah, trust is going to be major in those instances, because you can give someone your information, like let's say some information about a new product that you're releasing. You're giving it to a freelancer, having them build some content for you. Like you said, they could use, once it's in their hands, they could use any tool they want to build that content, even if you tell them use Jasper specifically because it has agreements to where it won't do anything with the data once it has it ingested. You don't necessarily know that. So there's a trust factor there, but I think on the company side, when you're given that information, there's a trust factor in, like, I think there's a level of how can I describe it? Sort of like being optimistically cautious and saying, like, okay, maybe you don't give them all of the company information that you want to share, which is the same way that you wouldn't, that there's like a lot of security hurdles that you have to get over just internally in general, like not releasing information too soon if you're going to IPO or anything like that. Like you wouldn't give that
Yeah.
information necessarily to a freelancer. So it's just about being a little bit, not like being a little bit more cautious
Yeah.
in those aspects, because there's that gray area where you can give some information but not all of it, still get a lot done, but you're not also just hoarding all your information, because that just slows down content production and things like that.
Yeah. I
I'm
think
also
that's fair.
wondering, like, what we're afraid of. Like, I get theoretically what we're afraid of, right? Like, we're giving our information to a black box, and then we don't know how this black box then generates outputs for other people who may be talking about a subject related to the information that I gave said black box. But sometimes I'm just like, does ChatGPT really care about me and like my marketing campaign right now, where I gave it a tidbit of like proprietary information, or you know what I mean? Those are like
Yeah.
sometimes the conversations that happen in my head. And as marketers, that's like what I try to do a lot, is like take the like big headline and dissect it down into like what it actually means for me. And I think a concept that's really interesting as we're talking about these models being black boxes, like they're not able to articulate how they came up with the output. We just know that they did. Is this idea of like an emphasis on explainability, on like it's like something people are talking about right now, where it's like we really need to get to the models in a place where you can say, well, how'd you come up with that output? Like, what were the series of computations you made or decisions you made that made you decide that this output was the best? And not only could it, you know, help with some of those security concerns that our minds run wild with when we just don't know how it's coming out with this stuff, but also in terms of like things like bias and prejudice and the decisions that it made to come out to that output, it would be a lot easier to screen for like, this is bad, if we were able to know kind of have that explainability factor or that breadcrumb factor.
Yeah. No, that makes
Absolutely.
total sense. Yeah. It reminds me of Alton just wrote a really interesting article on like bias in AI, specifically for the LGBTQ community. And it was interesting because like it is sort of this weird thing of like, you don't know how it's coming up with information that it's coming up with. And so there is a privacy concern where like to fight the bias, you need to be training it on LGBTQ people's like their information, their opinions. Like you need to be training it on that stuff so that it has that information to then output. But then that's like that's a security concern, because what if I'm at work and I don't want people to know that I'm, you know, necessarily out or something like that? Then it becomes this weird personal information thing, and then I just this weird battle between like privacy, but then okay, well, how do you actually like train these models, you know, with taking that into account and doing it safely? Way above my pay grade, but it is so interesting to think about, and it to me it's exciting to know that like behind the scenes of what I do every day, there are people out there like thinking about this stuff and things like explainability and like I don't know, I'm just excited to see kind of what comes from that stuff.
Yeah. And Alton, I'd love to hear some highlights from that piece on LGBTQIA and AI, and like how you thought about that for maybe folks that didn't get to read the piece yet.
Sure. Yeah. One of the topic Krista mentioned was one of the things that I thought was really, really interesting, because it, in order to remove that bias, you have to introduce more information about like not only the LGBTQ like IA community, but people within it, and the level of nuance within like everyone within that community and intersectionality and things like that. But you can't get too specific to out people. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And I love the GDPR, like general data protection rules in Europe specifically, because they make it a lot easier for people to opt in and out of having their data used for things like AI model training. So I thought that that was like a cool parallel between those two stories. But it was also interesting reading about and reading about research on. There was one research study that was done where some researchers built this data set called Winoqueer that tested models for bias against LGBTQ individuals, and like bias within the outputs, I should say. And what they did was they built a like data set off of, it was around a little over 2 million tweets from members of the LGBTQ community. and use that to basically fine tune Google's BERT model that came out in 2018, which they said was like off the shelf, inherently a little like kind of biased against LGBTQ people. So with that fine tuning, they were able to take the language of people in that community and make the model way less biased, which I thought was awesome. Like being able to take the exact language that these people are using and infuse it in this thing to where it is way less harmful, destructive, like way more inclusive of like histories, the colloquialisms, everything. It just really opened my eyes to the possibilities of that happening across the board. And I mean, that is already happening in different instances of models, like training models to be better in assessing financial data or healthcare records and things like that. So if you can do that in general with, you know, more with other areas like finance and healthcare, there's no reason why you can't take a model and infuse it with more inclusive language and information about people's backgrounds and things like that. So I thought that was great. And it transcends just generative AI models for content. Like there's a big section in that article I wrote about image recognition and how these models can definitely overlook people who don't look like a quote unquote traditional like male or female. Like what happens if someone is a trans individual? What happens if someone is presenting as something other than a male or female? It like looks at your facial structure and can even assess your tone of voice in certain instances. So being able to fine tune models with more inclusive data, I think will be a game changer in terms of curbing that bias. And one of the like biggest takeaways as far as the solutions to curbing that bias is ultimately just getting more involvement from people in the community, in addition to like the fine tuning, but just overall in the development stages, like when you're building the data, when you're building the model itself, when you're testing it after it's released, when you're getting input on it, like get input across the board from members of the community, and that will go such a long way to curbing the bias, basically.
Yeah. And you know what else is resonating with me is, I mean, it comes down to like every other inclusivity issue we talk about, but it's not just getting feedback, but it's like actually employing those people to be developing these things and developing the methodology. Like I just think it's to even prioritize something like that, like in a wide roadmap of things you have to prioritize while you're building models or building even an application layer and like correcting for some of these things. Like it is, you know, you do need members of this community to be actively employed and engaged in the work. Otherwise, it like, I don't think it ever can resonate the way that it should. So that's a point I've been thinking about. But, you know, I was on another podcast recently, and it was kind of like a free riff session. And I loved what we came out with there, which was like the good that AI could potentially do that we don't always talk about. Like we're so good at talking about the hypothetical bad things that AI could do, which is great. Like we riff on that all day on like all of the potential like tragedies that are about to happen. But some of the good things that we were riffing on were actually really good. It was like the idea of even like founding companies, right? Like our boss Megan says this all the time, is that like she believes the only thing that has really ever held us back from us and our ideas is our ability to communicate them effectively. And if you think about like the folks that maybe don't have access to some of the community and the influences that allow them to understand, hey, I can start my own business. Hey, I can build my own model one day or build my own company to be a company that I'd be really proud of. And like using tools like AI to be able to get there is just huge. So we were just riffing on that all day on like what is the future going to look like now that age is no longer a limiting factor? Like you can get all the access to the information you need now that, you know, proximity to whiteness or privilege or wealth isn't the determining factor on if you could be like a founder or not. And all the companies and good that might come out that way.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's such a good point. Yeah. And I think like, I think we're going to see that. We're also very good at staying in our like tech and marketing bubble, but yeah, I mean, I can see that having implications across industries of all kinds. I know that we've talked a bit about like the entertainment industry in one of our last episodes, and I know that's also a hot button topic, and people are scared of it. But I think it could do amazing things for TV writers and screenwriters. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. I see a lot of that being the idea of individual people figuring out the use cases that work best for them, like those screenwriters and people like that. And even me, like my use cases for it, as far as it helping me to like edit content for grammar and clarity and things like that when I don't feel like bothering one of you or, you know, somebody else on our team. But then also like kind of back to the idea of trust and trusting that other people are not using it for things they really shouldn't be using it for, or that it's not being used in a way that someone else's use case is not doing any harm to someone else, that it is taking a job away from someone who otherwise should be doing this job, like taking a job away from a screenwriter, for instance, because someone at a major like film production company is like, instead of having 5 writers on staff, we're just going to have one who's just going to prompt like all of these scripts to be made, edit them, and then release them, you know, like give the tools to the 5 screenwriters and have them do even better work than they maybe were doing before, or faster work. So yeah, I think it's like really, really pushing up those positive individual use cases and just trying to educate people and encourage them to like not pull back on the negative use cases and the ones that could potentially harm other professionals in whatever like sphere of business they're in.
Yeah. It really brings me right back to what keeps me up at night, that education piece. Like, it is on us to like help people understand the shortcomings. Like, no, you don't need to replace your screenwriters or your freelance writers. Like, you need to give them these tools because they can use them, but you still need them. I think we're in like a really kind of slightly messy adjustment period where you see people who are trying to figure out how to use them, but I do think it's for us to step in a little bit and help guide that so that we don't have any of those situations where you were talking about, Alton, where people are unjustly losing their jobs or getting replaced when they really shouldn't be. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I guess as we wrap up, something I'm curious about myself, and none of us may have the answer to this, but I'm curious, like, if I am at a company wanting to use this stuff, it's like, what does it even mean for a tool to have good security? Like, do we even have like rules around like what does a good security program even look like? Like, if I'm a director of content, what do I need to even be looking out for? I would assume like
give them a checklist.
Yeah, I would assume like I know stuff we do, like we encrypt data, we make sure that like nobody can get in and steal data. I think like there's probably some stuff around we don't use it to train or anything like that. Like is that stuff that makes sense to y'all? Like that companies should be looking out for? Because I feel like that's a big question that I see.
I think all that is spot on. Yeah. Encrypting the data and just there being some verbiage of there being an agreement to where we will not like use this data to either train our model, or we will not use this data like for anything sales related even, or at the very least like giving that data to other companies for whatever reason, which already happens too much as far as like you sign up for a newsletter for one company, like a fashion company or something like that because you're buying clothes, and the next thing you know, you're getting emails from like 3 or 4 other fashion companies. So just looking out for language in the agreements that keep stuff like that from happening. And John in the interview made a really good point that from the security side, for people working on actually making these tools, these AI tools, more secure, that he personally approaches it and like guides his team from the perspective of the security principles for securing something like this are kind of the same for financial institutions, right? Because like our money is within these financial systems. That data has to be as secure gets. But those principles can apply to pretty much everything. And there's really no reason why they shouldn't when you really think about it. But it's just a matter of making sure that those protections are in place, and that I guess you're kind of reading the fine print on what their encryption is like, and just the more common sense stuff, like that data being shared. And I mean, you can really get technical and nuanced when it comes to that stuff, but I think it's important for the companies that are doing these protections and putting these things in place to kind of explain it in common sense language for the lay people like us to explain really well too. So I think reading through the fine print as much as you can in instances like that where you're trying to use a new tool will go a long way. I think to look for some of those like more common sense security protections.
Yeah. Sounds like I need to have John help me put together a security checklist to live on our blog.
Yeah, let's just send him like the company, like any company we're giving our email address to now. Hey, John, can you review this really quick just to make sure they don't sell my email address for me, please?
Yes,
it's so funny. I think I'm the only one. And again, I'm just revealing all my red flags on this podcast. I love when I get retargeted. I'm like, great. I don't like shopping. I did do one Google search, and I would like to be haunted by, one brown sweater that is oversized. And you can just target me with every single brand.
I was about to drag you because as that's like a red flag, but I am so like convinced by Instagram ads. I don't know the last Instagram ad I've gotten where I haven't like pulled the trigger and actually bought the thing.
And then the swipe up plus Apple Pay, forget about it.
Forget it. Yeah.
It was bought the moment I looked at it.
Yeah, it's too easy. I'm not even that haunted anymore when I'm like having a conversation with somebody and then something from that conversation pops up as one of those Instagram ads. I'm like, all right, well, that makes sense. Before that used to like freak me out, and now I'm like, no worries.
I know. I know. I'm always like, I know what's happening. Like, I know what they're doing to me. I'm a marketer. But at the same time, I need the platform Adidas. Like, I just need them. I didn't know I needed them until this very second, but here they are.
I mean, the model's built, like the precedent is built for like taking someone's interest or search and then retargeting the hell out of them and making a ton of money by doing so, by selling like that data point. So I could see a world where, and we're starting to hear about them start popping up. I don't know if they have, enough juice to actually have a viable product. They could be out there like the fashion AI startups and the beauty ones and things like that, where you're able to like, I don't know, in some world have AI put together outfits for you or put together some sort of like, hey, this is my style, spin up 5 different outfits with links from the internet on where I could buy those things. And then that data goes and then you're being retargeted. But again, that feels like efficiency to me.
In my head, it's like the scene from Clueless where Cher is using her little AI computer thing to put together outfits that she should wear. That's what we need. We need to go back to 1995. They had it figured out then.
I love that. Well, leave it to the 3 of us to start out with a very serious security topic and end on the topic of Clueless. But I appreciate you all for joining us on this episode, and we will see you on the next.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, y'all. See you next time.